Hello, today I'd like to do the first in a short series on how to cartoon simple objects in perspective in 3 dimensions. And so we'll start with how to do a basic cubic shape with a few different kinds of perspective. So we'll start with a square, more or less. 2 sets of parallel lines. This is a completely flat plane. There's no sense of space in it at all. And so what we're going to do is add another side going into depth. Now the basic idea of a formal perspective is called the horizon line and the vanishing point, are the 2 main elements we're dealing with. The horizon line is the level of your eye. And so you would draw it if you were going to draw it, but usually it's just implied. But if you're going to draw it, it's going to be how tall are you relative to this shape. So we're going to assume that our eyeball, we're just exactly the same height as the middle of this box. So we draw in this horizontal line here. That's our horizon where our eye level is. The next feature is the vanishing point, which we're going to draw in there. And the whole idea is that parallel lines, when they go into distance, converge. They come together. So I say you've got a road going off into the distance. 2 parallel lines, if you're looking down at a road, it's like that. Going into the distance, they look like they come together at a point on the horizon. That's the whole idea. So in this case, we've got 2 parallel lines coming away from that edge, and we'll converge them on the vanishing point. Then we give a little edge here. That's the back of our cube. So now we have a cube instead of just a flat front face. And then we can do the same thing, just use our road horizon line. Now we have a sort of cubic shape, but we're looking down at it, because it's down below the horizon line. Now if there's a cube up above, it's higher than us. The same exact process. But because it's above the horizon line, it looks like it's above us. And let me do another one over here just to show it's just the reversed process. And that's the basic idea of what's called one-point perspective, because there's one vanishing point. Now, there's some issues here. This front face, it looks pretty flat still. It's just facing us directly. It's like as if that front was just directly in front of us, which doesn't happen very often. So there's something a little odd here. So we'll talk about that in a second. But now in practice, remember I said the horizon line is usually implied. If I just want to draw 4 cubes, I already know that those extra lines are going to converge towards a horizon, towards a vanishing point on the horizon. Since I know how it works, I can just come close. And cartooning is really quite forgiving. So in practice, you kind of know how it ought to look. So once you've done a few of these and get a feeling for how it works, you just, in your mind, you imagine that horizon line, you imagine where that vanishing point is, and you only draw the parts that you need. So there we have the same effect, but without all the extra stuff. Now in order to take care of this flatness, we're going to try what's called 2-point perspective. Here we'll start with our horizon line. We'll give ourselves a vanishing point on either end and a straight line. Now what that line is this edge between those 2 faces of that cube. Now we do the same thing we did before. We converge from our corners to the 2 different horizon lines, and then we put our edges down. And now we have a somewhat more natural looking cube Now we're straight on this corner, looking straight at this corner, so it's still a little more formal maybe than it would otherwise be, but it looks much more three-dimensional in some ways than the one-point version. Now if we bring it below the horizon line, so this cube is below us, we're doing the same thing, right? We've got those same lines we drew here, but they're going off here. We're going to give our back edges, like so. But now we've got a third face of the cube visible. So what do? We go back to our vanishing points again. And now we have an even more three-dimensional looking cube where you can see three faces. We can do the same thing above. So remember, I said that parallel lines all converge to the same point. And so the reason this works is this line, and this line are all parallel. So they all converge to the same place. Same thing with these three. So that is two-point perspective. And it works the same way. Once you get used to it, you can draw yourself a three-dimensional cubic form without having to worry so much about actually drawing that horizon line. But you need to try it a few times for real with your, maybe with a ruler, that helps, before you get the idea of how it's supposed to look. Now, the other thing to notice here, all these three lines are parallel. All of these lines are parallel. They're all straight up and down. But we learned, right, that all parallel lines converge off into space. That's where three-point perspective comes in, where these guys start to come together as well. Once it gets below the horizon line, those are going off into the distance down and up. So we'll do that next. Okay. We got our horizon line, our 2 points of perspective. We're going to put, now we're going to do 3 points. So we're going to do one up here. This middle line is going to be more or less straight up and down. But now, let's imagine, oh, there's a horizon line, a vanishing point way up above. So see, these lines are starting to converge. Now, what you might want to do when you're practicing this is get on a big piece of paper where you've got enough room, you can put a dot that's about as far away from, these points as this, so you get plenty of space. Because if you bring it too close, it's going to start looking like much more like a cone. That really doesn't work. It's too sharp. You got to do some different things to make that look natural. But so they start to converge. And now, same deal. Once you get a feeling for this, let's see, I'm going to be looking down at this guy. Once you get a feeling for how it works, you can just draw it without all the extra lines. So one other thing that's handy about all this stuff, I've been drawing these cubes, but we can do the same thing with just that one face. Let's say this is a piece of paper that's perfectly flat. Well, if we look at it kind of from an angle, these parallel lines start to converge. And if we look at it almost head on, they converge a lot. That's, you're looking at just barely the edge of that piece of paper. Or that. Maybe it's a piece of plywood, or maybe it's a sign, maybe it's a billboard. We've got little feet coming off of it. And so this basic idea of, now these guys would also See, there's a roadside sign or something like that. So this idea of these parallel lines converging off into space can be really useful. So now let's put that into practice. Let's give ourselves in this case, kind of below this thing, but we're also sort of in the middle. So our horizon line is somewhere in here. But these lines are converging a little bit. Here we got a box. Let's make this into a house. We'll give it a window here. Now because this is a little bit above that horizon line, we'll give it a door on the front. Now, what happens here with the roof? What I would usually do is I figure out the center point and give myself a point here to bring the roof up to, and I connect. See, I do the front face here. And then, figuring out more or less where that horizon line, or that vanishing point is, I do another vanishing point, another line to that. And then these are going to be parallel more or less. But now most of the time, roofs, they come forward a little. So I extend this roof line a little bit past, bring it forward in space, bring this down a little lower because roofs usually hang over some. Then let's say it's got siding. Well, then we can give it some parallel lines that also they all converge on that vanishing point. So this is a really simple cartoon house, but you get the point. And with cartooning, once again, it's really forgiving. Doesn't have to be completely realistic, but giving it these basic perspective elements makes it feel that much more real than just this. See everything in parallel, see how flat that is compared to this? So that is the basic concepts of perspective on a rectangular shape. Now I'm seeing, I'm not quite happy with that. If I had a ruler, an eraser, which I own one. Let's see, let me grab one. Didn't feel quite right. And that is actually key. If it doesn't feel right when you're looking at it, you might want to rework it. But that gives you your basic concept for how to do these objects in 3 dimensions. And next time we'll work on spheres and cylinders, and that will give us all the building blocks we need to make more complex shapes like characters.